After 9 years living off me, my son-in-law won $66 million in the lottery. The next day when I got home, I found my bags on the sidewalk and he shouted, "We don't need your crumbs anymore, go live on the street." I replied, "Did you read the name on the ticket? Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from." My name is Jonathan, and at 61 years old, I thought I'd seen enough of life's cruelties to be prepared for anything. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my world collapsed. I'd just finished my shift at the hardware store, where I'd been working part-time for the past 3 years, not because I needed the money desperately, but because staying busy kept my mind off the growing tension at home. The Florida sun was particularly merciless that day, and all I wanted was to get home, take a cool shower, and maybe watch some television with my daughter Eliana and her husband Raymond. As I turned onto Maple Street, something felt wrong. There were suitcases on the sidewalk in front of my house. My suitcases. 3 brown leather bags I'd owned for over 20 years, sitting there like abandoned pets under the blazing sun. My heart started racing, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were spring cleaning. Maybe Raymond was finally organizing the garage like he'd promised for the past 2 years. I parked my old Honda Civic and walked toward the front door, my keys already in my hand. Before I could even reach the porch steps, the door swung open with such force it made me jump. Raymond stood there, all 6 feet 2 inches of him, his face twisted into an expression I'd never seen before. Pure contempt. His usually perfect brown hair was disheveled, and his eyes had a wild gleam that made my stomach clench with fear. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look who's finally home." I stopped walking, confusion washing over me like cold water. "Raymond, what's going on? Why are my bags outside?" He stepped onto the porch, crossing his arms over his chest. The same chest I'd bought countless shirts for over the years because he was between jobs and needed to look presentable for interviews that never seemed to materialize into actual employment. "What's going on?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What's going on is that your services are no longer required, old man." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked past him, hoping to see Eliana, my 34-year-old daughter, who had been the light of my life since the day she was born. She was standing in the hallway, her arms wrapped around herself, looking anywhere but at me. "Eliana," I called out, my voice cracking with desperation. "Sweetheart, what's happening here?" She finally looked at me, and what I saw in her eyes broke something deep inside my chest. It wasn't anger or hatred. It was indifference. Complete, cold indifference. "Dad," she said quietly, "Raymond and I think it's time for you to find your own place, find my own place." In the house I'd been paying the mortgage on for 15 years. The house where I'd raised her as a single father after her mother died in that car accident when Eliana was just 12. The house where I'd welcomed Raymond with open arms when they started dating 6 years ago. Where I'd celebrated their wedding. Where I'd sacrificed my retirement savings to keep afloat while he pursued one failed business venture after another. "I don't understand," I stammered, feeling like a lost child. "This is my house. We're family." Raymond's laughter was cruel and sharp. "Family?" He reached into his back pocket and pulled out what looked like a lottery ticket. "You see this, Jonathan? This little piece of paper just made me $66 million richer. $66 million. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Raymond won the lottery? The same Raymond who couldn't hold down a job at a convenience store for more than 3 months? That's wonderful," I managed to say, though nothing about this situation felt wonderful. "We can celebrate." "Celebrate?" Raymond cut me off, his voice rising to a near shout. "The only thing I'm celebrating is finally being free from your pathetic charity. Do you have any idea how humiliating it's been, living off the scraps of a sad old man who works at a hardware store?" Each word was like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. I'd never made him feel like charity. I'd welcomed him into my home because I loved my daughter, and I thought he loved her too. "Raymond, please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk about this? I just want what's best for Eliana." "What's best for Eliana?" He stepped closer, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath. He'd been drinking, celebrating his win, I realized. What's best for Eliana is being married to a millionaire, not having her loser father hanging around like some kind of charity case. I turned to my daughter one more time, hoping against hope that she would stand up for me, that she would remember all the bedtime stories, all the school plays I never missed, all the times I held her when she was sick or scared. Eliana, please, I'm your father. She looked down at her feet, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry, Dad, but Raymond's right. We need our space. Those words shattered the last piece of my heart that was still whole. My own daughter, the child I'd raised alone, was choosing the money over me. She was choosing him over me. Raymond grabbed my bags and threw them further onto the sidewalk, clothes spilling out onto the hot pavement. There's your stuff. Don't come back. We don't need your pity money anymore. We don't need you at all. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching my daughter disappear back into the house, watching Raymond slam the door in my face. The sound echoed through the neighborhood like a gunshot. Neighbors had started to peek out their windows and doors, drawn by Raymond's shouting. Mrs. Martinez from next door looked at me with such pity in her eyes that I wanted to disappear into the ground. I gathered my belongings as quickly as I could, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the handles. Everything I owned in the world fit into 3 suitcases. 61 years of life, reduced to 3 bags on a sidewalk. As I loaded my car, I kept thinking about the lottery ticket Raymond had waved around. Something nagged at me about it, something familiar. But my brain felt too scrambled to process it clearly. All I could focus on was the devastating reality that I was homeless, abandoned by the only family I had left. I drove away from Maple Street for what I thought would be the last time, tears streaming down my face. In the rearview mirror, I could see Raymond and Eliana watching from the front window. He had his arm around her, and they looked like the perfect couple finally free from an unwanted burden. That unwanted burden was me. I didn't know where to go, so I ended up at a motel on the outskirts of town. The Sunset Inn, a rundown place with peeling paint and a neon sign that flickered every few seconds. It was all I could afford with the cash I had in my wallet. The room smelled like cigarettes and disappointment. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at my suitcases and wondered how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. But as I sat there in that miserable little room, something began to surface in my memory. Something about that lottery ticket that Raymond had been so eager to show off. Something that didn't quite add up. Lying in that motel bed, staring at water stains on the ceiling that looked like storm clouds, my mind drifted back to how this nightmare had begun. It was almost 9 years ago when Eliana first brought Raymond home for dinner. I remember being so excited to meet him. Eliana had been alone for too long after her divorce from Marcus, and seeing her smile again, hearing her laugh on the phone when she talked about this new man in her life, it filled my heart with hope. She deserved happiness after everything she'd been through. Raymond had seemed charming that first evening. He was handsome in that polished way that younger men often are, with perfect teeth and easy confidence. He brought flowers for Eliana and a bottle of wine for me, even though I rarely drank. He complimented my cooking, asked about my work, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. "Mr. Peterson," he'd said over dessert, "Eliana tells me you raised her all by yourself after her mother passed. That must have taken incredible strength." I'd felt myself warming up to him immediately. Finally, someone who understood what Eliana and I had been through together, what we'd overcome as a team. "She made it easy," I'd replied, squeezing my daughter's hand. "Eliana's always been special." The early months of their relationship were beautiful to watch. Raymond would come over for Sunday dinners, help me with yard work, and make Eliana glow with happiness in ways I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. When he started having trouble with his apartment lease, it seemed natural to offer him the spare bedroom. "Just temporarily," he'd assured me, that charming smile lighting up his face. "I've got several job interviews lined up. I'll be out of your hair in no time." That was 8 years and 11 months ago. The job interviews came and went. First, there was the pharmaceutical sales position that just wasn't the right fit. Then the insurance company that didn't appreciate his innovative ideas. The marketing firm that was too corporate for his entrepreneurial spirit. All was someone else's fault, never his. But I didn't mind at first. I genuinely liked Raymond, and seeing Eliana happy was worth any temporary inconvenience. My house had felt too quiet since she'd moved out for college anyway. Having young voices and laughter fill the rooms again made me feel useful, needed. The first red flag should have been the way Raymond talked about work. Not just the jobs he couldn't keep, but the very concept of regular employment. He'd sit at my kitchen table, drinking coffee I'd bought, and explain why traditional jobs were beneath someone with his vision. "I'm not built for the 9-to-5 grind, Jonathan," he'd say, using that tone people use when they're explaining something to a child. "I'm an entrepreneur. I think big picture." You know what? His big pictures were always just out of reach. The food truck business that needed $10,000 for startup costs. The online marketing company that required specialized software and equipment. The cryptocurrency venture that was going to make us all rich if I could just invest my retirement savings in his guaranteed system. I said no to the bigger requests, but I found myself saying yes to the smaller ones. Gas money for job interviews, a new suit for an important meeting, groceries when he was between opportunities, phone bills, car repairs, medical expenses when he claimed he couldn't afford insurance. Each request came with promises. Each promise was broken with an excuse. But Eliana seemed so happy, and Raymond was so good at making me feel like I was helping family, not enabling a grown man who refused to take responsibility for his own life. The shift in Eliana was gradual, so subtle I almost didn't notice it happening. She started calling less frequently. When she did visit, she seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly, cutting conversations short. The easy closeness we'd always shared began to feel forced, artificial. "Dad, you know Raymond's really trying," she'd say, whenever I gently suggested he might need to be more serious about finding steady work. "The job market is tough right now. He's got so much potential. He just needs the right opportunity." Fierce, she started parroting his excuses, defending choices that made no sense. When Raymond decided he was too good for entry-level positions, Eliana supported him. When he turned down jobs because they didn't offer enough vacation time or flexible schedules, she nodded along with his reasoning. The man was slowly poisoning my relationship with my daughter, and I felt powerless to stop it. The breaking point should have been the Christmas incident 3 years ago. I'd saved up for months to buy Eliana a beautiful necklace she'd admired in a jewelry store window. It was white gold with a small diamond pendant. Nothing extravagant, but meaningful. I wanted to show her that despite all the money I'd been spending on Raymond's emergencies, he was still my priority. On Christmas morning, I watched her open the gift box, saw her face light up with genuine joy for the first time in months. "Dad, it's beautiful," she'd whispered, tears in her eyes. "You didn't need to spend so much." "You're worth every penny, sweetheart," I'd replied, feeling like maybe things were getting back to normal between us. But Raymond's gift to her was a vacation to Hawaii. 2 weeks in Maui, first-class flights, oceanfront resort. It must have cost $15,000 minimum. Money he claimed he'd saved up, though I knew for a fact he hadn't worked a steady job in 6 months. Later, when Eliana was in the bathroom, I'd asked him about it. "Where did you get the money for Hawaii, Raymond?" His smile had been cold, calculating. "Don't worry about it, Jonathan. Some of us know how to make money work for us instead of the other way around." I suspected he'd used her credit cards or maybe convinced her to take out a loan, but I didn't have proof. And when I saw how radiant Eliana looked talking about their upcoming trip, I couldn't bring myself to spoil it for her. That was my mistake. I chose her momentary happiness over addressing the deeper problem that was slowly destroying our family. The Hawaii trip was just the beginning. Suddenly, Raymond was always planning something expensive: weekend getaways, fancy restaurant dinners, concert tickets, new clothes. He'd learned that as long as he was generous with Eliana using borrowed or credited money, he wouldn't ask too many questions about his lack of legitimate income. Meanwhile, my own expenses kept climbing. The mortgage payments, utilities, groceries for 3 people instead of 1, Raymond's endless, temporary needs that never seemed to end. I started working overtime at the hardware store, picking up weekend shifts, Anything to keep up with the financial pressure. "You don't need to do that, Dad," Eliana had said when she noticed how tired I was getting. But her tone suggested she expected me to keep doing it anyway. The worst part was watching Raymond's attitude toward me change. The gratitude and respect from those early days disappeared, replaced by a sense of entitlement that grew stronger with each passing month. He stopped saying, "Thank you." He stopped pretending to look for work. He started treating my house like it was his house, making decisions about meals, television shows, even home repairs without consulting me. "Jonathan," he'd say, not even looking up from his phone, "we need to get the air conditioning fixed. It's too hot in here. Oh, we need new furniture for the living room. This stuff is ancient. We should get cable with all the premium channels. Basic television is depressing." Always we. As if he was an equal partner in a household he contributed nothing to maintaining. I tried talking to Eliana about it, but she'd gotten defensive, protective of him in ways that broke my heart. "Raymond's going through a tough time, Dad. He's trying to figure out his next move. Can't you just be patient?" Patient. I'd been patient for almost 9 years. The final straw before yesterday's catastrophe was last month when Raymond announced he was going to start day trading. "It's the future, Jonathan," he'd explained with that condescending tone he'd perfected. "I've been watching the market, studying patterns. I just need some seed money to get started." When I refused to give him access to my savings account, he'd gotten angry for the first time in years. "Fine," he'd snapped, "but don't come crying to me when I'm rich and you're still working at that pathetic hardware store." Rich. Raymond was going to be rich. The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me now, lying in this motel room, replaying the day's events. But as I thought about his lottery ticket, about the way he'd waved it around so triumphantly, something still didn't feel right. The numbers, the store location, the date. There was something familiar about all of it, something I needed to remember. The next morning came too soon, bringing with it the harsh reality of my situation. I'd barely slept, tossing and turning on that lumpy motel mattress, while my mind raced through everything that had happened. But in those sleepless hours, something had crystallized in my memory, something that changed everything. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding as the pieces finally fell into place. The lottery ticket Raymond had waved around yesterday wasn't his at all. It was mine. 3 weeks ago, on a Saturday morning, I'd stopped at Murphy's Corner Store on my way home from my weekend shift at the hardware store. I did this every week, same routine I'd followed for years. Buy a lottery ticket with the same numbers I'd been playing since Eliana's mother died. Her birthday, Eliana's birthday, our wedding anniversary, and the date of Eliana's high school graduation, 7/14/22/1831, and the Powerball number 6. But that particular Saturday had been different. As I stood in line behind Mrs. Chen and her weekly grocery shopping, I'd overheard her talking to Murphy about her grandson's upcoming wedding. "Such a beautiful couple," she was saying. "They've been together for 6 years, just like my late husband and I were before we married." 6 years. That's how long Raymond and Eliana had been together, and suddenly, standing there with that lottery ticket in my hand, I'd had an idea. A romantic, foolish idea that I thought would bring our fractured family back together. Instead of putting my name on the ticket, I'd put Raymond's. It was supposed to be a surprise, a gesture of faith and love. I'd planned to wait a few weeks, maybe until their anniversary next month, and then reveal what I'd done. I'd imagined the look on Eliana's face when she realized her father had been playing their family numbers all these years, and that when they finally hit, I'd made sure the winnings would go to her and her husband. I thought it would show Raymond that I trusted him, that I considered him family. I thought it would prove to Eliana that despite all our recent tensions, I wanted nothing more than her happiness. I thought it would heal the wounds that had been growing deeper between us. I was a fool. Sitting in that motel room, staring at my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, I felt like the biggest idiot who'd ever lived. My act of generosity had backfired spectacularly. The man who'd just thrown me out of my own house, who told me I was nothing but a pathetic charity case, was now a multimillionaire, thanks to my own kindness. But here's what Raymond didn't know, what he couldn't know, because I'd never told anyone. I had the receipt. And more importantly, I had the security camera footage from Murphy's store. Murphy was an old friend, someone I'd known since high school. His corner store had been robbed twice in the past few years, so he'd installed a comprehensive security system that recorded everything. Every transaction, every customer, every lottery ticket purchase. The footage was automatically backed up to a cloud service and kept for 90 days. I'd bought that ticket. I'd filled out the numbers. I'd paid for it with my own money. And somewhere in Murphy's system, there was video proof of all of it. My hand shook as I reached for my phone. I needed to call Murphy, needed to secure that footage before it was too late. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I turned on the motel room's ancient television and flipped through channels until I found the local news. Sure enough, there it was. Local man wins $66 million jackpot. They showed a brief clip of Raymond standing outside Murphy's store, grinning like he'd just conquered the world, holding up the winning ticket for the cameras. "This is going to change everything for my family," he was saying into the reporter's microphone. "We've been struggling for so long, and now we can finally live the life we deserve." Struggling? We've been struggling, as if he'd been the one working overtime to pay the bills. As if he'd been the one sacrificing his retirement savings to keep the household afloat. The reporter asked him about his plans for the money, and Raymond's answer made my blood run cold. "First thing, we're getting a new house, somewhere worthy of our new status. We've been living in, let's just say, less than ideal conditions, but all that's behind us now. Less than ideal conditions." He was talking about my house, the house I'd worked 2 jobs to afford, the house where I'd raised my daughter as a single father, the house I'd opened to him out of love and generosity. I turned off the television and called Murphy. "Jonathan!" His gravelly voice was warm with familiarity. "How are you holding up, buddy? I heard about what happened with Raymond and the lottery ticket. That's got to be quite a shock." "Murphy," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I need to ask you about that ticket. Do you remember me buying it?" There was a pause. "Well, of course I remember. You buy the same numbers every Saturday. 7, 14, 22, 18, 31, and 6 for the Powerball. Your wife and daughter's birthdays, right?" "Right. And 3 weeks ago, when I bought the winning ticket, do you remember anything unusual about that purchase?" Another pause, longer this time. "Actually, yeah. You asked me to put someone else's name on it instead of your own. Said it was going to be a surprise for your son-in-law. I thought it was real nice of you, Jonathan. Real generous." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. "Murphy, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to pull the security footage from that day. Can you do that?" "Sure thing. But Jonathan, are you okay? You sound upset." I took a deep breath, trying to find the words to explain what had happened without breaking down completely. "Raymond and Eliana kicked me out of the house yesterday. They said they don't need me anymore now that they have the lottery money. They told me I was nothing but a charity case." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Murphy, are you there?" "I'm here," he said finally, and his voice was hard with anger. "Those ungrateful. Jonathan, you get down here right now. We're going to fix this." I threw on yesterday's clothes and drove to Murphy's corner store, my mind racing with possibilities and fears. What if the footage wasn't clear enough? What if there was some legal loophole that would allow Raymond to keep money that was rightfully mine? What if I was too late? Murphy was waiting for me when I arrived, his weathered face set in grim determination. At 73, he was built like an old oak tree, sturdy, dependable, and not easily moved once he'd planted himself somewhere. "I've already pulled the footage," he said without preamble. "Let me show you something." He led me behind the counter to his small office, where a computer monitor showed a frozen image of the store interior from 3 weeks ago. There I was, clear as day, standing at the lottery machine with a play slip in my hand. "Watch this," Murphy said, clicking play. The footage showed me filling out the numbers, then walking to the counter where Murphy himself was waiting. The audio was crystal clear. "The usual numbers, Jonathan?" "Actually, Murphy, I want to do something different this week. Can you put my son-in-law's name on the ticket instead of mine? Raymond Stevens. It's going to be a surprise." "That's real thoughtful of you. Raymond's a lucky man to have you looking out for him. I just want my family to be happy." Murphy paused the video and turned to look at me. "Jonathan, this footage proves that you bought and paid for that ticket. Doesn't matter whose name is on it. Legally, it belongs to whoever purchased it, and that's you." I stared at the frozen image of myself, remembering that moment of misguided generosity. I'd been so proud of my plan, so certain it would bring us all closer together. "There's more," Murphy continued. "I called my nephew Danny. You remember Danny? He's a lawyer now, works for one of those big firms in Tampa. I told him what happened, and he says you've got a slam-dunk case. The ticket might have Raymond's name on it, but you've got proof of purchase, video evidence, and witness testimony. That money is legally yours." I should have felt relieved. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow, empty, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left nothing but an aching void. "Murphy," I said quietly, "what kind of person does this make me? Fighting my own daughter for money." The old man's expression softened. "Jonathan, you're not fighting your daughter, you're fighting for your daughter. There's a difference. That boy has poisoned her mind against you, made her forget who she really is and where she came from. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is stop enabling their worst impulses." He was right, but it didn't make the decision any easier. If I pursued this, it would mean war with the only family I had left. But if I didn't, it would mean letting them get away with the cruelest betrayal I'd ever experienced. "What do I do?" I asked. Murphy smiled grimly. "We called Danny and set up a meeting. It's time to remind your son-in-law that actions have consequences." As I sat in Murphy's office, watching him dial his nephew's number, I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to keep our family together. All the sacrifices, all the compromises, all the times I'd swallowed my pride for the sake of peace. Maybe it was time to stop being the peacekeeper and start being the man who stood up for what was right. Danny Murphy turned out to be everything his uncle had promised: sharp, efficient, and absolutely furious on my behalf. At 38, he had the same determined jaw as his uncle, but wore expensive suits and spoke in the precise language of someone who'd spent years learning how to fight battles with words instead of fists. "Mr. Peterson," he said as we sat in his downtown Tampa office 2 days after my meeting with Murphy, "I want you to understand something very clearly. This isn't just a case of rightful ownership. What your son-in-law has done constitutes theft by deception at minimum, and potentially fraud, depending on whether he tries to claim he purchased the ticket himself." I shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair across from his mahogany desk. Everything about this office screamed success and money, making me acutely aware of my own circumstances. I was staying in a $28 a night motel and wearing the same clothes I'd had on when Raymond threw me out. "Danny, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I need you to understand something too. That's still my daughter we're talking about. I don't want to destroy her life." "Listen." Danny leaned back in his chair, studying me with the kind of intensity that probably made opposing lawyers very nervous. "Mr. Peterson, with all due respect, your daughter's husband already tried to destroy your life. He threw you out of your own home after 9 years of living off your generosity. He publicly humiliated you. He stole $66 million from you. At what point do you stop protecting someone who clearly has no intention of protecting you?" The words stung because they were true, but Eliana was still my little girl, the child I'd raised alone after her mother died. The thought of hurting her, even to protect myself, made my chest ache. "What exactly would happen if we pursue this?" I asked. Danny opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. "First, we file for an emergency injunction to freeze the lottery payout until ownership can be determined. The State Lottery Commission is required to investigate any ownership disputes before releasing funds. With the evidence we have, the security footage, the store receipt, your uncle's testimony, they'll have no choice but to hold the money." He slid a paper across the desk to me. "This is a cease and desist letter we'll send to Raymond, informing him that any attempts to claim or spend the lottery winnings constitute theft of your property. And this," he pulled out another document, "is the formal complaint we'll file with the sheriff's office if he doesn't cooperate voluntarily." I stared at the papers, my hands shaking slightly. It all seemed so official, so final. Once I signed these documents, there would be no going back. How long would this take? I asked. With evidence this clear? Probably 6 to 8 weeks for the Lottery Commission to make their determination. But here's the thing, Mr. Peterson. I don't think it will take that long. I think once Raymond realizes he's facing potential criminal charges, he'll fold pretty quickly. Danny was right about the timeline, but he was wrong about Raymond folding quickly. The first sign of how ugly this was going to get came that evening when my phone started ringing. I'd given Danny permission to serve Raymond with the legal papers that afternoon, and apparently the news hadn't been well received. The first call was from a number I didn't recognize. "You pathetic old bastard." Raymond's voice was slurred with alcohol and rage. "How dare you try to steal from your own family?" I hung up without responding, but the phone immediately rang again. This time it was Eliana. "Dad?" Her voice was small, confused. "What's going on? Raymond says you're trying to sue us for the lottery money." "That can't be true." The hope in her voice broke my heart. Even now, even after everything that had happened, she still believed her father was incapable of something like this. "Eliana, sweetheart, I need to tell you something about that lottery ticket." "Dad, please, just tell me you're not really doing this. Raymond's so upset, and I don't understand what's happening." I took a deep breath and explained everything. The weekly lottery tickets, the decision to put Raymond's name on the winning ticket as a surprise, the security footage, the legal ownership. I spoke slowly, carefully, trying to help her understand that I wasn't the villain in this story. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Dad," she finally said, "even if that's all true, you gave the ticket to Raymond. You can't just take it back because you changed your mind." "I didn't change my mind, Eliana. Raymond threw me out of my own house and told me I was worthless. He stole from me, not the other way around. He didn't steal anything. You gave it to him. I gave it to him as a gift, as part of our family, but apparently I'm not part of this family anymore, so the gift doesn't stand." Another long pause. "Dad, you're scaring me. This isn't like you." She was right. It wasn't like me. The old me would have backed down, would have found a way to justify letting them keep the money. The old me would have chosen keeping the peace over, fighting for what was right. But the old me had ended up homeless and heartbroken. "I love you, Eliana," I said quietly, "but I can't let this go. What Raymond did was wrong, and you know it." She hung up without saying goodbye. The next 3 days were torture. Raymond left increasingly threatening voicemails. Eliana called twice more, each conversation ending in tears and accusations. I started turning my phone off for hours at a time just to find some peace. But Danny had been busy. On Thursday afternoon, he called with an update. "The Lottery Commission has officially frozen the payout pending investigation," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Raymond tried to claim the money yesterday morning and was turned away. According to my contact there, he made quite a scene. What happens now? Now we wait for them to review our evidence. But Mr. Peterson, I have to tell you something. Raymond hired a lawyer, Marcus Weinstein from Clearwater. He's good, and he's expensive. Your son-in-law is taking this very seriously." That evening, Murphy called me at the motel. "Jonathan, you need to see something. Can you come down to the store?" 20 minutes later, I was standing behind Murphy's counter watching security footage from that afternoon. Raymond's car was parked outside, and I could see him gesturing angrily at someone in the passenger seat. "Eliana, he's been here 3 times today," Murphy said grimly. "First time was around 10 this morning. He came in demanding I destroy the security footage. When I refused, he started threatening me." My blood ran cold. "Threatening you? How?" "Said he'd shut me down, have the health department inspect me every week, make my life hell. Kid's got a mean streak, Jonathan." Always suspected it, but seeing it come out like this, Murphy shook his head. "The second time, he brought your daughter with him. She looked like she'd been crying." "What did they want?" "She begged me to tell the truth about the lottery ticket, said I was destroying her family with lies." "Broke my heart, Jonathan. She really believes you're the bad guy here." I watched the footage of my daughter pleading with Murphy and felt something inside me crack. Raymond had turned her against me completely. In her mind, I was the greedy old man trying to steal her husband's lottery winnings out of spite. "The third time was just an hour ago," Murphy continued. "This time he came alone, and he had a different approach. Murphy fast-forwarded the footage to show Raymond entering the store with a large envelope in his hands. He offered me $20,000 to say I made a mistake, that I remembered wrong about who bought the ticket. When I said no, he upped it to $50,000. I stared at the screen, watching Raymond pull thick stacks of cash from the envelope. He was trying to bribe Murphy with money he'd gotten by claiming my lottery winnings. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so infuriating. I told him the same thing I'm telling you, Murphy said. I don't lie for money, no matter how much of it there is. That night, lying in my motel bed, I realized that this had moved far beyond a simple dispute over money. Raymond was getting desperate, and desperate people did dangerous things. He'd tried intimidation, bribery, and emotional manipulation through Eliana. What would he try next? I got my answer the following morning when Danny called, his voice tight with anger. Mr. Peterson, Raymond's lawyer filed a countersuit yesterday. They're claiming you're suffering from dementia and that your memories of purchasing the lottery ticket are false. They're also alleging that you've been stealing money from Raymond and Eliana for years by overcharging them for living expenses. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. Dementia? Stealing from them? It gets worse. They're requesting a competency hearing and asking the court to appoint a guardian for you. If they succeed, that guardian would have control over all your financial and legal decisions. The room seemed to spin around me. Raymond wasn't just trying to keep the lottery money. He was trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so I couldn't fight him at all. Can he do that? He can try, but Mr. Peterson, I need you to understand something. This changes everything. We're not just fighting over money anymore, we're fighting for your freedom. As I hung up the phone, I realized that I'd underestimated Raymond completely. I'd thought he was lazy and entitled, but ultimately harmless. I'd been wrong. The man was willing to destroy me completely, rather than admit what he'd done. But if Raymond wanted a war, he was about to learn that this old man still had some fight left in him. The competency hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in Judge Patricia Coleman's courtroom. I'd never been inside a courtroom before, and the formal atmosphere made my stomach churn with nervousness. Danny had prepared me for what to expect, but nothing could have readied me for the sight of my own daughter sitting at the opposing counsel's table, her eyes red from crying, refusing to look in my direction. Raymond sat beside her in an expensive new suit, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. The picture of a devoted husband defending his fragile wife from her delusional father. It was a performance, but I had to admit it was a convincing one. Mr. Peterson, Judge Coleman said from her bench, I understand you're contesting the allegations made by Mr. Stevens regarding your mental competency. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Raymond's lawyer, Marcus Weinstein, was everything Danny had warned me about. Smooth, expensive, and completely without conscience. He stood up with the kind of confidence that comes from years of winning cases, regardless of whether his clients deserved to win. Your Honor, Weinstein began, my clients are here today with heavy hearts. Mr. Peterson is clearly suffering from age-related cognitive decline, as evidenced by his delusional belief that he purchased a lottery ticket that my client, Mr. Stevens, actually bought with his own money. I watched in horror as Weinstein presented what appeared to be a compelling case. He had medical records showing that I'd been treated for stress-related anxiety over the past year. He had statements from neighbors claiming I'd seemed confused and forgetful in recent months. He even had a supposed witness who claimed to have seen Raymond buying the lottery ticket at Murphy's store. But Danny had been preparing for this fight, and when it was his turn to present evidence, he came out swinging. Your Honor, the defendant's case relies entirely on character assassination and manufactured evidence. What they don't have is what we do have. Actual proof of who purchased the winning lottery ticket. Danny played the security footage from Murphy's store on a large monitor. The image quality was crystal clear, and there was no mistaking what it showed. Me filling out the lottery numbers, me paying for the ticket, me specifically asking Murphy to put Raymond's name on it as a surprise. Furthermore, Danny continued, pulling out a thick stack of bank statements, Mr. Peterson's financial records show a pattern of lottery ticket purchases going back over 15 years. Same day, every week, same amount, same store. The only difference 3 weeks ago was his generous decision to put the winnings in his son-in-law's name. I watched Raymond's face as the evidence mounted against him. The confident smirk he'd worn when he entered the courtroom was gradually replaced by something closer to panic. But it was Murphy's testimony that really sealed the case. At 73, Murphy might have looked like just another small-town shop owner, but his memory was sharp as a razor, and his integrity was unquestionable. I've known Jonathan Peterson for over 40 years, Murphy testified under oath. He's been buying lottery tickets from me every Saturday for as long as I can remember. Same numbers every time: 7, 14, 22, 18, 31, and 6. His late wife's birthday, his daughter's birthday, their wedding anniversary, and his daughter's graduation date. Murphy looked directly at Raymond as he continued. On the Saturday in question, Jonathan specifically asked me to put his son-in-law's name on the ticket instead of his own. Said it was going to be a surprise for the family. I thought it was a real generous thing to do. When Weinstein tried to cross-examine Murphy, suggesting that his memory might be faulty, the old man's response was perfect. "Son, I've been running that store for 32 years. I remember every regular customer, what they buy, and how they like to pay for it. Jonathan Peterson pays for his lottery tickets with exact change every Saturday at 11:15 in the morning, right after his shift at Henderson's Hardware. Has done so for 15 years without fail." You don't forget details like that. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source, Raymond himself. Under direct questioning from his own lawyer, Raymond had to explain how he claimed to have purchased the winning ticket. His story was full of inconsistencies and obvious lies. "I bought it on impulse," he testified, sweat beading on his forehead despite the courtroom's air conditioning. "I was at Murphy's store getting some snacks, and I just decided to buy a lottery ticket." "What numbers did you choose?" Danny asked during cross-examination. Raymond hesitated. I used the quick pick option. Let the computer choose random numbers." Danny smiled and pulled out the actual lottery ticket, which had been entered into evidence. "Mr. Stevens, this ticket shows manually selected numbers, not computer-generated ones. Can you explain that discrepancy?" Maybe I misremembered. It's been a few weeks." "Mr. Stevens, can you tell the court what these specific numbers represent? 7, 14, 22, 18, 31, and 6? Raymond's face went pale. "I don't know. They were just random numbers I picked." "Actually, they're not random at all, are they? They're significant dates in your father-in-law's family. His late wife's birthday, his daughter's birthday, their wedding anniversary, and his daughter's graduation date. Quite a coincidence that you would randomly choose these exact same numbers that Mr. Peterson has been playing for 15 years. The courtroom was completely silent. Raymond opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He had no answer because there was no answer that wouldn't admit his guilt. But the moment that broke my heart was when Danny called Eliana to the witness stand. My daughter looked fragile and lost as she was sworn in. She kept glancing between Raymond and me as if she couldn't decide which of us to trust. "Mrs. Stevens," Danny said gently, "you remember your father ever buying lottery tickets?" "Yes," she whispered. "How often?" "Every week, every Saturday morning after work." "Do you know what numbers he played?" Eliana's voice broke as she answered. "Family dates, Mom's birthday, mine, their wedding anniversary, my graduation." "Mrs. Stevens, 3 weeks ago, did your husband tell you he had bought a lottery ticket?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, he told me he'd won after the drawing, said he'd bought it on impulse that day." "But you now know that's not true, don't you?" Eliana looked at Raymond, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw doubt in her eyes. Real doubt. I don't know what to believe anymore." Judge Coleman called a brief recess, and I watched as Eliana rushed out of the courtroom, Raymond hurrying after her. Through the windows I could see them in the hallway. Raymond was gesticulating wildly, clearly trying to convince her of something, but Eliana was shaking her head, backing away from him. When court resumed, something had changed. Eliana returned to her seat, but she no longer had her arm linked through Raymond's. Instead, she sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor. Judge Coleman's ruling was swift and decisive. Based on the evidence presented, I find that Mr. Peterson is of sound mind and fully competent to manage his own affairs. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, the preponderance of evidence clearly shows that Mr. Peterson purchased the contested lottery ticket and that Mr. Stevens's claim to ownership is without merit. She turned her stern gaze directly on Raymond. Mr. Stevens, I strongly advise you to cooperate with the Lottery Commission's investigation and to cease any attempts to claim winnings that rightfully belong to Mr. Peterson. Any further interference could result in criminal charges. As we left the courthouse, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. I'd won, but at what cost? My relationship with my daughter might be permanently damaged, and the family I'd spent 9 years trying to keep together was destroyed. Danny was elated. Mr. Peterson, this was a complete victory. The Lottery Commission will release the funds to you within 48 hours, and I doubt Raymond will try any more legal challenges after today's humiliation. But I barely heard him. All I could think about was the look on Eliana's face when she realized that everything Raymond had told her was a lie. As I walked toward my car, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Eliana running toward me, tears streaming down her face. "Dad," she sobbed, throwing her arms around me. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." I held her tight, feeling like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for us after all. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "We're going to figure this out." Over her shoulder, I could see Raymond standing by his car, watching us with an expression of pure hatred. He'd lost everything, the money, the house, and most importantly, Eliana's trust. But as I held my daughter close, I realized that I hadn't just won a court case. I'd won back the most important thing in my life, my relationship with the child I'd raised and loved from the day she was born. The real battle, though, was just beginning. Raymond wasn't the type of man to accept defeat gracefully, and I had a feeling this wasn't over yet. 2 weeks later, I stood in the kitchen of my own house for the first time since Raymond had thrown me out. The Lottery Commission had released the $66 million to me the previous Friday, and my first act had been to reclaim my home. Raymond had fought the eviction notice, but with no legal right to the property and no money to pay for lawyers, his resistance crumbled quickly. The house felt different now, emptier, but also cleaner somehow, as if a poison had been drawn out of it. Most of Raymond's belongings were gone, hauled away in a rented truck, while I watched from my front porch. He'd barely looked at me as he loaded boxes, his face a mask of bitter resentment. Eliana had moved out too, but for different reasons. She'd rented a small apartment across town, telling me she needed space to figure out who she was without Raymond's influence. I respected her decision, even though part of me wanted to beg her to stay. "I need to remember how to be your daughter instead of his wife," she'd explained the day she packed her things. "I've forgotten who I was before I met him." That conversation had been 3 days ago, and I hadn't heard from her since. The silence worried me, but Danny had advised patience. "She's processing 15 years of manipulation," he'd said. "That doesn't happen overnight." I was in the middle of making coffee when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Eliana standing on my front porch, looking nervous and uncertain. When I opened the door, she managed a small smile. "Hi, Dad. Can we talk?" "Of course, sweetheart. Come in." She followed me to the kitchen, accepting the cup of coffee I offered her. For several minutes, we sat in comfortable silence, both of us seeming to appreciate the simple normalcy of sharing a quiet morning together. "I filed for divorce yesterday," she said finally. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Part of me was relieved, but I also knew how much this decision must have cost her. "I know you probably think I should have done it sooner," she continued, "but I needed to understand how bad things had gotten, how much he'd changed me. How are you feeling about it?" She considered the question carefully. "Scared? Relieved? Angry at myself for letting it go on so long?" She paused, looking directly at me. "Dad, I owe you an apology that goes way beyond what happened with the lottery ticket. Eliana, you don't... Please, let me say this." Her voice was firm but gentle. I let Raymond turn me against you. I let him convince me that you were controlling, that you didn't understand our relationship, that you were trying to keep us from being independent. I believed him when he said you were the problem. I reached across the table and took her hand. He was very convincing. That's not an excuse, Dad. You raised me to think for myself, and I stopped doing that. I let him do my thinking for me, and that's on me, not him. We talked for 2 hours that morning, really talked in a way we hadn't in years. Eliana told me about the gradual way Raymond had isolated her from her friends, how he'd criticized every decision she made until she stopped making any decisions at all. She told me about the financial pressure he'd put on both of us, always just enough to keep us struggling, but never enough to force real change. He was systematic about it, she said. Looking back, I can see how he played us against each other. When you'd suggest he get a real job, he'd tell me you were being unreasonable. When I'd defend him, he'd tell you I was choosing him over you. He kept us both off balance so we wouldn't compare notes and figure out what he was doing. I thought about all the times I'd bitten my tongue, all the moments I'd chosen keeping peace over confronting the truth. I should have said something sooner. Would I have listened? She asked honestly. Or would I have just pulled away from you even more? She was right. Raymond's manipulation had been so subtle, so gradual, that any direct challenge would have driven Eliana deeper into his web. Dad, can I ask you something? Why did you put Raymond's name on the lottery ticket, even after everything he'd put you through? I sighed, remembering that moment of foolish hope in Murphy's store. Because I wanted to believe that generosity could fix what was broken between us. I thought if I showed him I trusted him completely, if I gave him something that valuable, it would prove that I saw him as family. And instead, he used it to try to destroy you. Yes. But Eliana, in a way, I'm grateful it happened. She looked at me in confusion. Grateful? If Raymond had been satisfied with just taking my house and my money, I might have let him. I was so afraid of losing you that I would have accepted almost any treatment. But when he tried to have me declared incompetent, when he tried to erase me completely, I shook my head. That's when I realized I had to fight back, not just for me, but for you too. Well, what do you mean? I mean that if I'd let him get away with that level of cruelty and manipulation, what would he have done to you next? How much further would he have gone? Eliana was quiet for a long time, considering this. Finally, she nodded. He was getting worse, more controlling, more angry when things didn't go his way. I was starting to be afraid of him. That admission hit me like a physical blow. Afraid how? He never hit me, she said quickly. But there were moments when I thought he might, when he'd get that look in his eyes and I'd find myself backing away from him. I felt a cold rage building in my chest. The thought of Raymond intimidating my daughter, making her fear for her safety in her own home, made me want to hunt him down and teach him what real fear felt like. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was ashamed. I was embarrassed that I'd let things get that bad. And honestly, Dad, I wasn't sure you'd believe me after how badly I'd treated you. I stood up and moved around the table to hug her. Sweetheart, I would always believe you. Always, no matter what's happened between us. She cried then, really cried, and I held her the way I used to when she was little, and the world seemed too big and scary. So, what happens now? She asked, when the tears finally stopped. Now we figure out how to be a family again, just the two of us. What about the money? I'd been thinking about this question since the lottery commission released the funds. $66 million was more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but it also represented something more important: security, freedom, and the power to make choices based on what was right rather than what was expedient. I want to set up a trust fund for you, I said. Enough so that you never have to depend on anyone else for financial security. The rest, I'm still figuring out. Dad, I don't want Raymond's money. It's not Raymond's money, sweetheart. It never was. It's our family's money, earned with our family numbers, and it's going to help our family heal. 3 months later, I was sitting in my backyard, watching Eliana plant tomatoes in the garden we'd decided to start together. She'd moved back into her childhood bedroom temporarily while her divorce was finalized, and slowly, carefully, We were rebuilding the relationship that Raymond had worked so hard to destroy. The money had given us options we'd never had before. Eliana was able to quit the job she'd hated and go back to school to become a teacher, something she'd dreamed of doing since she was young but couldn't afford. I'd set up the trust fund as promised, ensuring she'd never again have to compromise her values for financial security. The rest of the money I'd invested conservatively, keeping enough liquid to live comfortably while building a foundation that would support causes I cared about. Nothing flashy or dramatic, just quiet support for local charities, scholarships for single parents trying to get an education, and assistance for elderly people who had been abandoned by their families. Raymond had disappeared entirely after the divorce was finalized. The last I'd heard, he was living in a studio apartment in Clearwater and working at a call center. Eliana had told me this with no satisfaction, only sadness for the years we'd all lost to his selfishness and manipulation. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't put his name on that ticket?" Eliana asked me one evening as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset. "All the time," I admitted. "But I think I know the answer. He would have found some other way to drive us apart. Men like Raymond don't change. They just find new methods." "I'm glad it happened the way it did," she said quietly. "Really?" "Really. Because if it hadn't, I might never have seen him for who he really was. I might have spent the rest of my life being slowly poisoned by his resentment and greed." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, sweetheart. You would have figured it out eventually." "Maybe, but this way, we both got free at the same time." She was right. The lottery ticket that was supposed to be a gift of generosity had instead become our liberation, not just from Raymond, but from the fear and guilt and constant walking on eggshells that had defined our family for too many years. As I sat there watching my daughter water her tomato plants, planning her return to school, talking about the future with excitement instead of anxiety, I realized that $66 million was nothing compared to the real prize I'd won. I had my daughter back. I had my self-respect back. I had my home back. And for the first time in 9 years, I was truly, completely free. The phone in my pocket buzzed with a text message. For just a moment, my heart clenched with the old fear that it might be Raymond, that somehow he'd found a way to reach us again. Instead, it was from Murphy. "Saw the article about your scholarship fund in the paper. Your wife would be proud of you, Jonathan. You did good." I smiled, looking up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. Maybe she would be proud. Maybe all of this, the pain, the betrayal, the fight, and ultimately the victory, had led us exactly where we needed to be. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes, losing everything you thought you wanted helps you realize what you actually needed. I had learned that family isn't about who shares your blood or your name. It's about who stands by you when the world turns dark, who believes in you when you can't believe in yourself, and who chooses to love you even when you're not at your best. Raymond had taught me what family isn't, but Eliana, my strong, brave, beautiful daughter who'd found her way back to me, she reminded me what family really means, and that was worth more than all the lottery tickets in the world.